The Nintendo 64 greatly suffered from a lack of large-scale role-playing games, with both development studios Square, the developers of Final Fantasy, and Enix, the developers of Dragon Quest, immigrating towards Sony's disc-based hardware. Nintendo was left high and dry in the realm of RPG developers. Nintendo originally intended their big first-party N64 RPG to be developed by Square, who had handled development of Super Mario RPG Legend of the Seven Stars on Super Nintendo, but had cut ties with Nintendo in favor of focusing on the production of Final Fantasy VII for the PlayStation. Instead, the project was handed off to Intelligent Systems, the same studio responsible for the ever-loved Fire Emblem, Advance Wars, and WarioWare franchises. Paper Mario began development as Super Mario RPG 2 and was going to be released on the Nintendo 64's disk drive, a failed peripheral that never left Japan due to poor sales, which unfortunately tanked or otherwise delayed the release of multitudes of Nintendo games in the late 90s. With a luckier outcome than most other games for the 64 DD, Super Mario RPG 2 was eventually reworked for international cartridge release as Mario Story in Japan and Paper Mario in the rest of the world. Despite its turbulent development cycle and late arrival to store shelves, Paper Mario received critical acclaim at release, and has been re-released through digital services on Nintendo's Wii, Wii U, and Switch consoles, frequently being heralded as a must-play N64 title, and for that matter, one of the greatest RPGs and video games of all time. Let's try to put its quality into words as we discuss what's so great about Paper Mario. Intelligent Systems made sure that players immediately knew that this is a world much like Super Mario RPG, in which the species of Mario creatures, whether Toad or Goomba, doesn't dictate whether they're good or bad. As the game begins, we even see a Paracoopa delivering mail to the Mario Brothers. While previous Mario platformers had featured worlds and lands of very unique design, Paper Mario was the first time these worlds were all stitched together in a believable fashion. Though Paper Mario has now had several entries as a franchise, the Mario & Luigi RPG series has also elaborated further on this comical Mario universe. This game's many unique environments also never grow stale. With the myriad of fantastical worlds that had been featured in previous Mario titles, such as Super Mario Bros. 3 or Super Mario 64, Intelligent Systems was in no short supply of fun locations to send the player. Even without the idea of explicitly themed dungeons, such as those we'd see in Ocarina of Time, Paper Mario led players on an RPG adventure that spanned desert temples, tropical jungles, and haunted mansions. Toad Town serves as the game's central hub, offering multiple means of transportation to other locations in the Mushroom Kingdom as the game progresses, such as the train station, sewer, and harbor. There are also plenty of unique shops or buildings for players to invest more in the completionist side of Paper Mario's user experience. The dojo serves as a location for competent combatants to take on some of the greatest martial artists in the Mushroom Kingdom in exchange for prizes and practice. Tasty's Kitchen provides players with the opportunity to turn various combinations of the world's items into unique consumable dishes with powerful benefits. Paper Mario also features an enjoyably designed and understandable map, which was apparently still very difficult to implement in video games in the year 2000, but it connects all of the game's vastly different environments and also excites the player as they imagine what's in store for them at that curious spot on the map. It also keeps track of where Mario is and where he needs to go, with objective markers in games being even rarer than decent maps at this time in gaming. Intelligent Systems took this as an opportunity to introduce a bit of personality to characters who otherwise have barely had any screen time in previous Mario games. The majority of the party members who join Mario on his adventure are representatives of species which are often considered villains in Mario games. In fact, just because a Goomba or a Bob-omb is following you doesn't mean you're automatically on good terms with Goombas and Bob-ombs wherever you go. As with any fictional world, there are characters with their own missions, ideals, and circumstances in the game's social environment. The first partner that Mario recruits, a Goomba named Goombario, acts as a sort of liaison for the player as they learn about the game's world. At any time the player requests, he'll give brief snippets of information about nearby points of interest, whether they be locations or people. He can also use his tattle ability in battle to reveal enemy information such as remaining health and possible weaknesses. The health bars of any enemy types that Goombario has previously tattled on will also be present in all subsequent battles. It's impressive how much of Mario's expansive history was included as inspiration and reference for Paper Mario. Goombario will often explain the origins of classic characters or a mechanic in a funny way without becoming too meta or breaking the fourth wall. Even the early Super Mario Bros. Environments of the dingy sewers and bonus stages among the clouds managed to make their way into Paper Mario's world. The second member to join Mario's party is Kooper, an adventurous young Koopa who helps Mario by reaching previously inaccessible switches and items in the game's overworld. In battle, he also offers some multi-target attacks and defensive abilities. Some of Mario's partners really feel like they came out of left field, and it's a fun chance to see certain species in a new context, as exemplified by Watt, a young Lil Sparky who joins Mario roughly halfway through his quest. I don't know if we've ever seen another one of them with dialogue or personality in a Mario game. Even Cheep Cheeps and Locky-Twos have had more appearances. She's just an oddly unique character, and we don't even meet other Lil Sparkies in the Paper Mario rendition of the Mushroom Kingdom. Every other partner character, no matter their recognizability, offers Mario a whole selection of abilities while exploring and battling, and they never really grow stale or outlive their usefulness. The fact that players get to choose when to promote each party member means that if you realize you really only ever use a few of your favorite members in rotation, you can invest in improving them first in order to circumvent their weaknesses in battle. However, the fact that every character has their own ability while exploring the overworld means that no party member becomes totally obsolete, even if underleveled. Rather than stat-changing equipment like shields and armor, Mario collects badges which supply him with various abilities depending on how many badge points they're worth. The player can find a massive amount of unique badges throughout the game's world at shops, in treasure chests, and even as rewards for solving puzzles. A handful of these badges are all but required to defeat certain enemies or overcome chapter-specific challenges, but otherwise, every player is free to coordinate their badge collection with their playstyle, no matter if they favor jump attacks, item boosts, or partner abilities. As Mario's adventure unfolds, he'll come across improved versions of his boots and hammer, increasing not only his offensive capability in battle, but even his means of exploration in the overworld. Better hammer types will open new paths to the player, while new boots will allow for extra moves like the ground pound. With the additions of partner abilities, stronger hammers, and the ground pound ability, there's plenty of late game incentive for players to retrace their steps in search of more star pieces and badges to make the following chapters easier and more enjoyable. With the placement of various enemies throughout the game's routes and towns, Paper Mario does away with the typical random encounter format of RPGs, in favor of a structure that keeps the game at a much more appropriate pace for all audiences and skill levels. Many hardcore RPGs out there, especially those released in the 80s and 90s, virtually require the player to do a bit of training and leveling as soon as they have free control of their character. Often, more training and grinding will also have to be done at various difficult milestones in these games as well. However, in Paper Mario, players will come across pre-placed enemies in every location they travel through, and while grinding for experience or dodging battles altogether are both viable options, the entire game is masterfully paced so that the player never has to pause their adventure. There's no need to run back and forth in a patch of grass until you're strong enough to take on the next boss, as long as you haven't been skipping too many conflicts for the sake of time. If the player attacks an enemy out in the wild before the battle begins, they'll receive a first strike advantage and open the confrontation with some free damage against the enemy. The reverse is true if an enemy manages to get a drop on Mario. This actually gives a little more sense of fairness and reality to the random chances of preemptive strikes in RPGs like Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest. Additionally, if the player finds and equips certain badges as well, then they may even be able to skip low-level encounters altogether, much like the combat in Earthbound. Paper Mario's combat taking place on stage is a great way of incorporating the game's 2.5D design, but also making combat more family-friendly, in a similar manner to Pokemon's feinting mechanic, rather than outright killing. Much like Final Fantasy VII, Paper Mario's fights all feature unique backdrops not only reminiscent of your environment, but inclusive of the player's immediate surroundings, taking into account specific set pieces or room designs to make every fight interesting, which is a very important matter in the success of an RPG, in which players will constantly be experiencing the same fight format. Similarly to Super Mario RPG, though elaborated much further in Paper Mario, players can actively change the outcome of fights by participating with QuickTime events, referred to as action commands, which involve simple tasks such as pressing the A button to time jumps or blocks, as well as pulling the joystick as Mario reels back his hammer. Timing these actions just right will impact the fight by changing how much damage the player deals and receives, but it also keeps the player involved in combat so much more successfully and enjoyably than virtually any other RPG. One thing I've really grown to appreciate about Paper Mario's combat system is the use of single-digit increments to indicate damage and health. I really get tired of Final Fantasy and most other RPGs using hundreds and thousands of points of damage from the start of the game, as if that makes you feel like you're doing any better. Instead, it just makes it harder to actually keep track of what's more or less effective. In Paper Mario, 1 damage is 1 damage, and when enemies only have 4 or 5 health at the beginning of the game, that makes perfect sense. The player knows how many turns it will take to defeat this character, as well as how many hits they can survive themselves. This makes the improvement of stats and player ability much more important, so that combat can feel both fair and enjoyable. Then, when the player does something substantial later on, like a 10 damage combo, it actually means something, because they remember when 3 damage was a heavy hit. Though Mario's party members do get a chance to attack as well and use their own special abilities, they don't actually have their own health bar, which simplifies how much the player has to keep track of in case of chaotic attacks that would affect each party member differently. If the enemy is powerful enough to attack both Mario and his active party member, this most often just leaves them stunned for a few turns. The player can also choose the attack order between Mario and his active partner. While not too important at first, this allows for some really interesting combinations of techniques once the player has a wide assortment of party members as well as badges. All of a sudden, turn order and attack types could mean the difference between fights being brutal slogs or over in a flash. With every chapter completed and every new star spirit saved by Mario and the gang, players will receive a new special ability which requires star energy, a new meter that expands with every completed chapter and allows Mario to summon the stars to heal him, attack his enemies, or provide other buffs and electives in battle. While much of the game's world was obviously influenced by previous Mario games such as Super Mario Bros. 3 or Yoshi's Island, Paper Mario's art design was actually inspired by a blend of Walt Disney animations and Parappa the Rapper's flat yet expressive characters in a colorful world. Just because the world is meant to be made out of paper doesn't mean that Nintendo went cheap with the spectacle of it all. Paper Mario is one of those games that was released within the twilight era of a console's lifespan, when developers have really mastered the hardware and can knock out a few more impressive releases before the console kicks the bucket and everyone moves on. And Paper Mario's deceptively simple design certainly took advantage of the Nintendo 64's graphical capabilities while still putting on a fun show. The first time this really popped into my head was during the dynamic reveal of the Dry Ruins, but the game is just overall visually stunning, and so much attention was given in respect to idle animations, transitions, and other little details that could have otherwise left the flat presentation feeling stagnant or outdated. The 2D characters and storybook presentation are honestly a genius way of taking advantage of the N64's graphical limitations. Flat graphics or objects were used all throughout the games in the 90s, no matter the hardware, but Paper Mario actually came up with a creative reason for this visual trope. The simple watercolor backgrounds are another great complement to the game's artistic design, without betraying the intentionally flat and calm portrayal of the Mushroom Kingdom. While The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time is often seen as the Nintendo 64's golden child, Paper Mario is another virtually perfect video game experience that should be in anybody's list of video games that everyone should play at some point. Not only is Paper Mario a front-to-back fun experience, but the visual direction of this game is incredible, and it had to be, considering how late this title was released on the Nintendo 64. For perspective in the timeline, by the time Paper Mario reached Western markets, the PlayStation 2 was already out. This flat paper aesthetic wasn't only used as a loophole to graphical limitations, but it was also utilized for a unique comedic atmosphere unlike anything in any prior Mario game. It's a complete mystery why so few developers have ever pursued portraying their world in a similar style to this, with 2.5D camera systems and free exploration of a world which unravels in an organized fashion. I mean, how is it that you only experience the Mushroom Kingdom one strip of land at a time, and it's still one of the most fun Nintendo games in terms of free exploration ever? There must be something to that, and the fact that players can have fun exploring without worrying about getting lost, wasting time, or forgetting what they were working on allows this to be a timeless gaming experience. Paper Mario is one of the greatest examples I've ever seen of a cross-genre video game. There's turn-based combat with action elements, there's non-linear exploration with puzzle-solving mechanics, and there are plenty of challenges that test both the player's reaction time and mental acuity. On top of all of that varied gameplay is a comedic and well-written story that tells the whimsical, family-friendly adventure of interesting characters. That is what's so great about Paper Mario. Thank you all for joining us on this episode of What's So Great About Gaming, as we took a closer look at the success of Paper Mario. Want to see some bonus content? Maybe support the creation of these videos? If so, check out the What's So Great Discord, Twitch, or Patreon. Links for all of those are in the description. If you want to hear what's great about another game, check out the link to our last episode, Final Fantasy VI, on screen or in the description. And please take the time to subscribe to be involved in the discussions here. Thanks again for watching. Now go play a great game. We'll see you next time.